I'm quite a happy-go-lucky person and I like to see the best in everybody. So when I was in a relationship that was violent, and, he had a belt around my neck, tried to strangle me, there was some really, and I don't know why I'm smiling because it's not something particularly to smile about, but I guess I'm looking at 20-something-year-old me in hindsight now. Um, yeah, I think I was naive. I wanted it to work. I wanted things to happen because what had happened over time with that relationship, it was a 5-year relationship, is I'd been isolated from friends and family. So from those social groups that would kind of guide me and say things are right or they're wrong, I cut myself off from all of those people.
Lise, at what stage in your life did you find yourself? Relationship broke you to discover yourself.
Right. So I've been in a couple of relationships that have been quite coercive and quite what I would describe as toxic. But in terms of discovering myself, it's probably only been in the last couple of years that the realization has hit that actually I have been in some relationships that have not been particularly healthy. That's driven me to do some of the work that I'm doing at the moment with young people on recognizing what we call red flags in relationships. So I do lots of work in that space. For me, that has not only been helpful to help me understand, but it's also helping me heal whilst helping other people understand those relationships.
You mentioned the word coercive and toxic. So how would you describe a coercive and or toxic relationship?
Okay, so let's start with the word coercion. It's about someone taking power over you, whether that be your finances, whether it be your mental state, whether it be your friendship groups, and literally not being allowed to do what you want to do in order to function and thrive. And the couple of relationships I've been in have both had those characteristics, although they've presented quite differently.
How did they present themselves?
Okay, so I was in a relationship in my 20s that was quite violent. So obviously there's a lot of fear there. I find myself isolated from friends, from family, not able to go out and enjoy myself as a normal 20-something would be. Now I'm in my 40s, I look back at that relationship in hindsight and I'm able to say, do you know what, that wasn't great. Oh, there was a lot of what in the media we call red flags, so signs that things are not particularly great. But I wasn't educated enough to know that. I'd come from quite a nice family background, so my dad's really supportive. So when I'd been in a relationship like that, it was alien to me. So I didn't recognize it straight away. It took quite a few years to sort of look back. And I think the second relationship I had, I experienced what I call post-separation abuse. So there was a lot of control over things like divorce proceedings, child arrangements, and finances as well. So that's driven me to do a lot of the things that I do. It's just about not being able to fulfill your life in the way that a normal person should be able to function because someone else either overtly or covertly is controlling it.
Now, in terms of this first relationship you had in your 20s, you said it was quite violent at times. Were you a person who maybe, for your age at the time might be slightly immature, that you were taken advantage of by the other person in that relationship?
Yeah, I think I was naive rather than immature. I think I'm quite a happy-go-lucky person and I like to see the best in everybody. So when I was in a relationship that was violent, and, he had a belt around my neck, tried to strangle me, there was some really, and I don't know why I'm smiling because it's not something particularly to smile about, but I guess I'm looking at 20-something-year-old me in hindsight now. I think I was naive. I wanted it to work. I wanted things to happen because what had happened over time with that relationship, it was a 5-year relationship, is I'd been isolated from friends and family. So from those social groups that would kind of guide me and say things are right or they're wrong, I cut myself off from all of those people.
And were you put under pressure by your partner to cut yourself off from your friends and family?
Yeah, I think he'd badmouthed them over the years and made me believe that actually they didn't have my best interests at heart, and he did. It was very slow. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It was something that crept up very slowly over time. And by the time it got really serious and quite violent, we were sharing a mortgage together. We had joint finances. You know, I'll give you an example. I went on a night out with some friends when I'd finally tried to escape, and he was working in a local bank, and he had a bank account that they transferred all the money out of my bank account into his. Subsequently, he lost his job, but it was about controlling me and not enabling me to have my own money and go out. So yeah, that was quite an extreme thing that happened during that relationship.
So effectively what you're saying there, Lisa, is that, you know, your salary was going into the joint account. You had no control over your salary, that your partner was effectively controlling that account, and he was watching over your discretionary expenditure as well as the outgoing mortgages, food, and so on and so forth.
Something more serious than that. I did have my own bank account and I was paying him money, but he worked for a bank. I'm not going to talk about which banking chain he worked for. And he obviously had access to my personal bank account and was able to push a button that would, we're talking 20 years ago here. So he was able to push a button that meant that he could transfer money out of my personal bank account into his own personal bank account. He did that. He did get fired for it. But you know, I was out stuck in town with no money, and I had to ring him. Obviously, he became the saviour because I had no money in my bank account. Didn't realise why until the next day when it had all been transferred over into his. This is in the days before online banking.
Of course. And when that relationship broke up, you had a mortgage to settle. Who took on the burden of selling the house and paying off the mortgage?
We actually, and this is really classic of people that are in abusive relationships, we actually split up, sold the house, then got back together again and rented a house together. So by the time the relationship had officially ended, we didn't have any financial ties other than a rented property. I should have seen the red flags at the point where we'd sold the house and got rid of it and probably should have gone back home to my parents. I didn't. I went and found another house to rent with him whilst we waited to see what we were going to do in the future. Yeah, and there was a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, going back and forth. I work with survivors of domestic abuse, coercive control, and I also do run an education program for young people around that. Now, I know from research and experience that it can take up to 7 times before someone officially leaves an abusive relationship. So it's not as simple as like cutting the finances and off you go your merry way. There's a lot of to-ing and fro-ing, and there's a lot of there's a lot of cycles of that abuse that happens. So you'll get hoovered back in. You know, someone will say, "Oh, you're great, you're wonderful. I'm really sorry that I did this." So you're hoovered back in, and then you spat back out again. That ruined someone's self-esteem, and I think by the time I'd left that relationship, I was pretty broken. And then I went into another one 6 months later.
And what was the final straw in that relationship? What broke the camel's back, I suppose you could say?
Something really simple. And I always say this, it's never the big stuff that'll break the relationship. It had built up over time, and I was paying the rent. He was out of work. You know, I was 27, I think, at that point. He was in and out of work, so I was paying all the bills, paying the rent, and I was a day late with the rent. And I got home and he said, "The landlord's been, you're a day late with the rent." And I said, "Stuff the rent, stuff you, I'm leaving." And I did. I left and I took off in my car, but I didn't go home to my parents. I drove to Exeter and lived in an Airbnb, not an Airbnb, they weren't around then, a Premier Inn for a week.
Let's get a bit of distance between yourself and your ex-partner.
Yeah, and I mean, I lived in Yorkshire, so going from Yorkshire to Exeter is a big old journey.
True. All the way down the M1 and M4.
Oh, yeah, M5, I think it was. Yeah, straight down to Devon. But yeah, I had a break for a week, and it was my lovely dad who phoned and said, when are you coming home?
Very good. What about the next relationship you went into 6 months later?
Yeah, I mean, I was in that for 13 years. I married that person, had a child with that person. And I would say the control happened after we split up, and it took 7 years to release myself from that. It's a different dynamic when you share a child. I'm not going to go into masses of detail, obviously, because we do still share a child together. So I'm quite guarded on what I'll say about that. But there was a lot of struggles over finances. Before that, there was a lot of putting down, belittling. My self-esteem probably had never recovered from the first relationship. So there was always this nagging doubt in the back of my head that I wasn't good enough. And I think that was perpetuated through that particular relationship. That was made worse. But there was a lot of this, again, this dynamic of toing and froing. I've been on my own now for 7 years. And as a result, I've been able to unpick what's happened in past relationships. I now feel like I'm ready. So if somebody comes along, I feel like I'll be a totally different person. But it's taken me a lot of time to unpick why these people, what I liked about these people, what kept me there. So 7 years is a long time to unravel that sort of stuff. But yeah, I feel like I'm able to do that now.
And on your journey of self-discovery, what did you find about yourself that maybe led to these unhappy relationships?
I think I have this fixer thing in me. I want everybody to be nice, play nicely. I feel that everybody should have a nice side to them. So giving everyone the benefit of the doubt. The other thing is I quite like excitement. So I come from an acting background. I like to perform. I like excitement. I'm not good at sitting at home in my own company watching Netflix. It's just not me. And the thing about abusive relationships is they are quite exciting because they're a roller coaster of emotions. So I've had to discover what else can I get? What else is going to give me that excitement that a relationship might not necessarily be? Because that excitement was attached to negative things. So what I've had to do is look at what positive things will excite me in the future. So I now know that, I like travel. I love travel. I like being here, there and everywhere. I love the theatre. And I've actually been able to do that on my own. So if somebody comes into my life now, I am not going to... It's not about compromise, because I think all relationships have to compromise, but it's about not giving up my own identity for somebody else.
You're saying there effectively, this is that you like to go to the theatre, you like going to the cinema, you like the outdoors life. So effectively, you're a high energy individual, but sometimes I suppose you need to take a break and recharge the batteries. And that can be difficult for you if you find yourself in a coercive relationship, because there's always this energy going around you and it could be sucked out of you very quickly. So you have to be able to manage your energy very quick, very much so when you're in a relationship with people. So you need to be able to look after your own mental and physical well-being. That's kind of important learning for you. You mentioned there also that from your marriage you had a child. What's your relationship like with your child today?
Great. We've just been at Leeds Festival. We've had a great time. We went to Ibiza earlier in the year, so we do things together. Yeah, she's a teenager, so I don't talk too much about her other than some of the great things that we do together. She's actually inspired some of the work that I do. So I work with teenagers. We have an interactive theatre production that goes into schools, teaching children or teenagers about red flags in relationships. So that my daughter has actually been the inspiration behind that piece of work. So yeah, going back to what's my relationship like with her, it's great. And actually she's provided a lot of inspiration around supporting the next generation.
You just mentioned there that your daughter is a teenager. She's probably at the stage now where she wants to go to discos, look around for a boyfriend in school, whatever the case may be. What advice would you give to your daughter in terms of, establishing a relationship if it was just
I think I absolutely bore my daughter to bits with this topic because she knows what I do. She's seen the shows. I hope that I've provided her so far with enough information to understand that certain things are not acceptable. But there's also a danger that, coercive relationships are not just female victims, male perpetrators. They can happen the other way. So I'm very conscious that she doesn't go into a relationship potentially being the perpetrator and being the one that is, the bad guy. So I will have conversations with her around right and wrong, of what the healthy ways to behave are. But she's also seen the show, so she knows what we do. The show's aimed at her age group, and actually, she was the inspiration behind it. And some of the dialogue in there, I wouldn't know, being 47. So I've asked my nearly 14-year-old, okay, well, how does Snapchat work? What happens when you're in a friendship group or a relationship? How would Snapchat work in that context? So I think we both take a lot of guidance from each other because it's a new world. The world that I had in my 20s is going to be different to the world she has because we didn't have technology, not to the degree that they have now.
Just come back to your own childhood. Were you comfortable discussing relationship with your own mom when you were a 14-year-old?
I don't know about my mum. My dad, I'm really close to my dad, so I have a lot of conversations with my dad. I don't know if I ever sat down and had that conversation at 14, 15, but we certainly have it now. And actually, when he recognises it in people, go, what do you think about this? Do you think he's quite coercive? Do you think? So I think as I've grown, I'm able to have those discussions with my dad and really intelligent discussions around relationships. I don't think when I was sort of 14, 15, it was talked about in the way that mental health wasn't talked about, because we've seen an explosion with technology and people having more access to information. I think it's become more acceptable to talk about these things.
And in terms of your 14-year-old daughter, do you discuss with her, how she can protect herself against cyberbullying, bullying in school, for example?
Yeah, so we have things like she's got a TikTok account which is private. All her social media is set to private. I'm actually one of her friends on Snapchat. I don't understand Snapchat or how it works, but at least I'm there and I'm present on it. I do think it's a difficult balance between giving young people freedom, but also locking down things. How do you get that balance? And I'm still working through that at the moment. So how much freedom do I give her versus keeping her safe?
Question here on behalf of the audience, Liz, and the question is, were your parents overprotective of you when you were a teenager?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I think they were definitely protective of me. There was definitely a zero tolerance on certain things in and around. There was conversations around zero tolerance on drugs and those sort of things. And we did have those conversations. But when it came to relationships, I'm quite a free spirit. I've always felt like I was different to the rest of my family in that I'll just take off. I was 20, I took off to Italy for 2 years and went and worked in Italy. I don't know. Were they overprotective? I think they struck the balance okay. Because if they hadn't, I would have felt really controlled and stifled by that because of the way I am as a person. So I think they struck that balance okay, And as I say, me and my dad have a great relationship. In fact, I'm hoping he's coming around to put some curtains up in a bit.
Well, very good. So talked also there, you mentioned a few times that you like to see the good in people. Is that being slightly naive on your part?
This is going to sound really strange, but now I use my intuition a lot more. I use my solar plexus guides me if something's good or bad. I think experience has taught me that not everybody is nice in this world, but you can't assume that everybody's bad, else you just wouldn't get through life. Possibly in the past, I have been very naive, and I have trusted that everybody's got a good soul and good intentions. but experience has taught me that that's not always the case. So now I use my intuition to guide me rather than trying to override it with the logical brain, because my brain obviously isn't that logical. It's not working because it hasn't worked in the past, but my intuition does. If something's not right, I'll cut myself away from it. I'll move away from it. I don't want drama in my life. Don't want anybody to, the only drama I want in my life is my interactive theatre production that I run in schools. I don't want toxicity, negativity. I don't like it. My body doesn't like it. So I use that to guide me, if that makes sense.
It does indeed. And another question here on behalf of the audience is, if you're put in a situation where the other person is not being nice to you, are you capable of standing up for yourself and defending your position?
What I am capable of doing is taking a calculated look at the situation. So if I think I'm going to stand up for myself and this is going to explode and it's going to end up with somebody turning the tables so I look like the bad guy, I will literally just walk away from that. If I think that actually, no, I need to exercise my right here and talk about how this is making me feel and it's safe to do that, then I will. But it depends on the situation and the individual. And I'm good now at figuring out which individuals will be okay with me standing up and going, that's not right, that I don't like that, that doesn't feel right for me, and which ones are going to be vindictive and turn the tables around on me. And if that's the case, I just walk away and that person will never see me again.
Well done to you. Well, I'm here for you, Liz. And the first one is, looking back at your life now, what lessons have you learned in terms of all your relationships with regard to your family, academic, work and romance?
Yeah, I think I've learned quite a lot of lessons. So I've learned to trust my instinct. That's the biggest lesson I've learned. Trust your instinct. Don't override it. Sometimes the logical brain will kick in and say, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They can't all be bad. Actually, if your intuition is saying it's wrong, it's usually wrong. I think that I am more open about how I feel, particularly with family members. I think when I've gone through my experience, it's also understanding that my experience is my experience. And if somebody hasn't been in your shoes, it's really hard to articulate that. And it's understanding when to articulate it in a way that's supportive and that they can help you, and when not to say things. Because sometimes, I wrote a 20-page document when I was going through my coercive relationship to explain to my family. They didn't read it. So what was the point? So it's just about taking that, when you need support. Family, for me, have been my saviour. They have been the ones that have helped me in my darkest of times, and having that network, and also some really close friends that I've been friends with a lot. And I'm getting upset now because I'm just thinking about a really best friend of mine that has supported me through everything. And my brother and his wife as well, who've been amazing. So going back to that, I think support network is absolutely integral to, and regardless of what the support network is like for you, my family and really close friends have been great for me. Yeah.
Well done. Good answer. In terms of setting boundaries with people, are you a person who's had to really work at setting, start the question again. In terms of setting boundaries with people, are you a person who's had to work hard at being good at setting boundaries with people?
Yeah, because of the way I am, and I trust everybody, and I've got this empathic part of my personality. I see the good in everybody. But sometimes it's about boundary setting. So in relationships, yes, but also in friendships. I do a lot of support work with victims of domestic abuse now. And I know what it's like when you're in that cycle of abuse. You go round and round and round in circles. So I listen to this day in, day out from other people, but I'm absorbing their energy as well. So I have to set boundaries in that way. I have to set boundaries when other people are offloading onto me because they feel they can, because I've experienced it. But I also set boundaries when people are being negative in my life as well. So it's about saying no. I'm good at saying no. I will not accept blame for someone else's actions. Whereas in the past, I probably was, I'm really sorry. Using this word, I'm really sorry. Actually, when you sit back and think, actually, it wasn't you that was in the wrong. So why are you sorry? I won't say that I'm sorry anymore if that blame doesn't belong to me.
I know what you're saying there, Liz, because you're making yourself look weak in front of the other person for apologising for somebody else's behaviour, not your own behaviour. So you also mentioned there about intuition. I would be a strong intuition type person, a strong gut feeling type of person. And there have been occasions in my own life, to be quite honest, I'm sharing part of my own story here, where I should have said no when I said yes. In other words, I realised, whether it was a job, whatever the case may be, I felt this wasn't the right job for me. Instead of saying, I'm going to leave this job here and now, I stuck with it at a cost to myself. So I can share with you in that regard, like, you have to go with your intuition, your gut feeling. Don't allow yourself to overrule it, because the only person who pays at the end of the day is yourself for it.
Yeah, and I use what I call the sink or fly feeling. So if it makes me feel I sink, then either not the right person, it's not the right job, or it's not the right relationship to be in. If I feel high and light and airy and it feels great, then that is right for me. So I use those two. And it's again about using the body to guide me. If it de-energizes me, I don't want to be involved. If it provides me with energy and lifts me, then I do.
Looking back at your past, what circumstances would you consider as character building blocks that have made you the person you've become today?
I'm going to share some really personal story now. So January of this year, so we're in September the 1st now, I was in court being cross-examined for 5 hours because I'd claimed coercive control and domestic abuse against an ex-partner. Being cross-examined and made to feel like you're the perpetrator is very character building. In fact, it was probably the most horrific day of my life to date, where every behaviour, every characteristic, every email I'd sent in the last 7 years came out to play and was twisted and turned in a way to suit someone else, because that's what court does. And before I went into that situation, in my head, I kept saying, I can't do this. I can't cope with this. I want to run away from this. Not the day after, but 2 days after, I think my dad asked me how I felt. And I said, do you know what? I feel really empowered, like no one can touch me now, because I faced that adverse situation. So I think that's built character. And after that, I've been quite vocal and able to talk about my experience. Before that, I wasn't talking about it so much. I was starting to, but I felt after that, right, well, I've opened it up in a court of law now, so anybody can know. It's fine. I'm not scared.
But how do you help, or what advice do you give to your clients who are victims of coercive or abusive relationships when you meet them in your studio?
Depends on what stage they're at. So if they're out of it, boundaries. So you've talked about boundaries. If they're out of the relationship, but their ex-abuser, perpetrator, whatever you want to call them, is still on the scene trying to manipulate them either through children or through divorce proceedings or just generally watching them on social media, then it's about how do you set boundaries and have as little contact as possible with that person. If they're still in the relationship, the one piece of advice I don't give is, why don't you just leave? I have a real problem when people say, why don't you just leave? Because it's not that simple. So my first question to someone who's still in that relationship would be, do you have an exit plan, and how can I support you with that exit plan?
And would you recommend that people, if they're the victim of a coercive or abusive relationship, that they go and get counselling for themselves?
Whilst you're in a relationship, it's really difficult to have counselling. I would say absolutely, once you're out of the relationship, get counselling. I've had both, whilst I've been in it and whilst I've been out of it. The problem is when you're in it, you'll be given lots of advice and lots of things to follow that are not possible. So my best piece of advice to somebody, and I don't necessarily do counselling as such, I run an advisory service more than a counselling service, is what's your exit plan? Let's look at the practicalities of leaving. What are you going to do for money? Where are you going to live? What's going to happen to your children if you've got them? What about your job? And what about your friendship groups and any other connections that you still have to that person? So looking at all those factors and saying, actually, I don't have any money. Right, well, your priority is getting some finances together, get some money to leave. Because it's costly. And if you start going down the court route, it's even costlier, as I know. So, yeah, practical advice for someone that's in it. Once they're out of it, they really need the emotional support. They still need emotional support while they're in it, but it's about having the right focus. Because a lot of the time they get caught up in this cycle, and the route out of the bad relationship is having a proper plan in place, because people have to live at the end of the day.
I think one of the things you're saying there is that, if you're in a relationship with another person, it's important that you devote yourself to that person if everything is going well. But at the same time, I think it's important that you have your own set of friends, because you have to have your own life beyond that relationship and that person in that relationship with you. You have to show a bit of independence. And I think that's very important in a relationship. So one final question here for you is, name one relationship you'd like to have again, and what would you do differently this time around?
Right, I'm not going to talk about a romantic relationship, but I'm going to talk about, I'm getting upset now, a family relationship. So my auntie died during lockdown, and she was amazing, really wonderful, vibrant person. And actually, if I look at her, there's a lot of characteristics of me in her. I wish I'd spent more time with her, because she was quite young when she died. I think she was 60. She was such a life and soul party, high energy. I just wish I'd spent more time with her and talked to her and had more karaoke songs with her. So rather than talking about romantic relationships, my auntie, I'd like to have her back just to sing karaoke and find out a bit more about her.
Well done. And I'd like to thank you for coming into the studio today, Liz. It's been a very good conversation about coercive and violent relationships. I wish you well for the future. And I understand that it's been a bit difficult at times for you to talk about issues in your life, but you come in here today, you've been very full of energy. So well done to you.
Thanks, John.
We hope the stories told by our guests on relationships have helped you to improve yours. The theme for Season 9 is money. We are going to answer questions like, how can I budget and manage my finances better? What is the best way to invest my money, and where should I invest? How can I plan for retirement and ensure financial security in my later years? These and many other questions will be answered by our specially selected guests who have been there and done it. Join your regular host, John Burns, in Season 9 on the theme, Money. It will be fun and informative. See you in the next season.